My mom decided to ruin my wedding and convinced my sister to say that she was pregnant by my husband. After that, growing up, it was always just the three of us, me, Lily, and Mom. We were like a tight-knit little unit, surviving together after Dad left when I was 8 and Lily was only 5. We never talked much about him, and honestly, I never missed him. His leaving only seemed to bring us closer. My mom took on the role of both parents, and we all depended on each other. She'd often say we were like the legs of a tripod, that if one of us fell, the whole thing would collapse. I believed that for most of my life. Lily and I were complete opposites as kids. I was the responsible one, always taking care of things, always watching out for her. She was the wild spirit, the one who would climb trees in the backyard and come home with scraped knees and dirt-smudged cheeks, laughing like she had no care in the world. And me? I'd be the one running behind her, worrying she'd break something or get hurt. But as different as we were inseparable. My mom worked long hours, so I took on the role of Lily's caretaker, helping her with homework, cooking dinner for us both, tucking her into bed when Mom came home late. I learned how to braid her hair, even though I was terrible at it, and I always had to untangle the knots from her hair afterward. I'd tease her about it, calling her my little tornado. Lily was my world. Protecting her came as naturally to me as breathing. Whenever she was upset, I was the one to comfort her. When she cried, I was the one who wiped her tears. We shared everything, our secrets, our dreams, even our fights. But we always came back to each other. That's just how sisters are, right? At least, that's what I thought. Mom always stressed how much we needed to rely on one another. She drilled into us the idea that no matter what, family was first. It was us against the world, she'd say. And back then, it made sense. I never questioned it. But looking back, I realize now that my relationship with Lily was more than just sibling love. It was responsibility. I felt like I had to be her protector, her second mother. There were times I resented it, like when I missed out on going to school dances because I had to stay home with her, or when I had to push aside my own needs to make sure she was okay. But it was all I knew, and I never imagined it would one day turn into something more complicated. The older we got, the more we grew into our roles. Lily, the carefree one, always searching for adventure, and me, the steady rock she could depend on. It wasn't until I met Daniel that things started to shift. For the first time, I had someone, for myself. And Lily? She started pulling away. It was subtle at first, just little things like skipping our weekly coffee dates or being too busy to talk. I brushed it off, assuming she was just figuring out her own life. But now, I wonder if that distance was the beginning of everything, the start of the unraveling. The weight of our shared past is something I can't shake, even as the truth about Lily and my mother comes to light. It's like a thread that's always been there, binding us together. But now I see that it's also been strangling us in ways I never realized. What I thought was love and loyalty was really control, and I had never questioned it until now. I think back to those moments when we were kids, me braiding her hair, us giggling late at night when we were supposed to be asleep, the times I'd hold her when she was scared after a nightmare. It's hard to reconcile those memories with the lies she's told, with the betrayal she's a part of now. But maybe the hardest part is knowing that, in her own way, Lily was as trapped as I was. The day had finally arrived, or at least, it was just around the corner. My wedding to Daniel, the man I had loved for as long as I could remember, was set, and everything had been meticulously planned. The dress, the venue, the flowers. Every detail was perfect. It was the kind of wedding I had dreamed of since I was a little girl, imagining the white veil falling gracefully as I walked down the aisle to the sound of soft music, everyone turning to look at me with a mixture of admiration and joy. It was all going so well until I received the message from my mother. The text wasn't long, just a few words, really, but they were enough to stir a feeling of dread deep in my chest. Asterisk, we need to talk, now. Asterisk, my mother wasn't one to dramatize things. So, if she was telling me that we needed to talk urgently, something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I thought maybe it was a last-minute issue with the wedding planning, or something minor that could be fixed with a quick conversation. But there was an edge in her tone, even through the written words, that made me nervous. The drive to my mother's house was a blur. I barely noticed the familiar scenery of the small town where I had grown up, my mind too busy racing through possibilities. When I arrived, I wasn't prepared for what awaited me. My mother and my sister, Lily, were already sitting in the living room, their faces pale, eyes red as if they'd been crying. The air in the room was heavy, suffocating almost, as if some invisible weight was pressing down on all of us. My mother's hands trembled as she gestured for me to sit down, her voice low and shaky. I sat down, still clueless, but the dread had turned into something sharper, fear. Lily, my younger sister, sat next to her. She couldn't have been more than a year out of college, still finding her way in life. She was the fun one, the carefree one who always had a smile on her face, but today, she looked anything but carefree. Her eyes avoided mine, focusing on the floor, her hands nervously clutching the fabric of her dress. Something was very wrong. I didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. The words my mother spoke hit me like a sledgehammer. Lily was pregnant. The shock of that alone made my heart stutter, but it was what came next that sent my world spinning out of control. Lily claimed that Daniel, my Daniel, the man I was about to marry, was the father of her child. The room seemed to spin around me as the words sank in. My heart raced, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of terrible joke, a misunderstanding, something other than what it sounded like. Daniel wouldn't do that. He couldn't do that. I refused to believe it. At first, I simply shook my head, unable to form words. My mother, however, looked dead serious, her face lined with worry and sadness as she confirmed Lily's story. She was urging me, begging me, to cancel the wedding, to walk away from a man who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wanted to scream at her, at Lily, to deny it all and tell them they were wrong. But I was frozen, my thoughts a jumbled mess of disbelief, anger, and overwhelming hurt. I looked at Lily, searching her face for something, anything, that would tell me this wasn't true. But her eyes were brimming with tears, and she looked genuinely terrified. Her words were halting, filled with guilt and regret, but she insisted that what she was saying was the truth. She said that it had been a mistake, that it wasn't supposed to happen, that it was a one-time thing. But that didn't matter. The damage was done. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to cry, but instead, I sat there in stunned silence, my mind refusing to accept this new reality. How could Daniel do something like this to me? How could Lily? Betrayal from my sister cut just as deep, if not deeper, than the thought of Daniel being unfaithful. We had grown up together, shared everything. She was supposed to be by my side on my wedding day, not tear everything apart. My head swam with memories of Daniel and Lily. All those moments that had once seemed innocent, the times they laughed together at family dinners, the way they talked when I wasn't in the room, it all came flooding back with new meaning. Had I been blind to it all along? Was there something there I had been too in love to see? I tried to recall every detail, every interaction they had ever had, searching for clues that might confirm or deny what Lily was saying. But it was impossible to think clearly. Every memory I sifted through seemed tainted now. Were the smiles, the glances, the inside jokes between them more than just friendly interactions? I couldn't tell anymore. My trust in both of them had been shattered in an instant, but I wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. I couldn't just walk away from Daniel without knowing the truth. I needed answers. I needed to hear it from him. I couldn't confront him with accusations based only on Lily's words. As much as I loved my sister, there was a part of me that still held out hope that this was some kind of misunderstanding, that Daniel would have a reasonable explanation, that everything could still go back to the way it was. I left my mother's house in a daze, numb with shock and disbelief. As I drove back home, my mind raced with questions. How could this have happened? Why hadn't I seen it sooner? And most of all, was any of it true? My heart ached, but I wasn't ready to confront Daniel just yet. I needed time to think, to process everything. I needed to investigate on my own before I could face him. So, for now, I would wait. I would watch, and I would figure out the truth on my own terms, no matter how much it hurt. For the first time in my life, I didn't know who to trust, and I hated the feeling more than anything. The days that followed the bombshell Lily and my mother dropped felt like an emotional storm that I could barely navigate. My heart wanted to trust Daniel, but my mind was now clouded with doubt, confusion, and fear. Every little moment with him became an opportunity to study his behavior, to read into his words, his actions, his facial expressions. And yet, despite all the uncertainty gnawing at me, I couldn't bring myself to outright confront him. Not fully, not yet. I needed to play my cards carefully. The wedding day was drawing closer, and the weight of the decision ahead of me grew heavier with each passing hour. I spoke to Daniel, testing the waters, asking casual questions about Lily without revealing the full story. I needed to see if there was any flicker of guilt in his eyes, any hesitation in his voice that might confirm Lily's claims. But when I asked, Daniel simply laughed it off, as if the idea of something happening between him and Lily was absurd. He didn't even seem to consider it a possibility. Lily? Really? She's like a little sister to me, Em. What's going on? He asked, his voice calm, sincere. There was nothing overtly suspicious about his reaction, but that didn't stop the doubt in my heart from creeping in. Was he hiding something? Or was I losing my grip on reality, letting the paranoia consume me? And then, there was Lily. My sister's behavior had shifted dramatically since that day. She was avoiding me now, which wasn't entirely like her. Every time I called, she had some excuse for why she couldn't talk. Every text went unanswered for hours, sometimes even days. When I finally did manage to pin her down, I could see how frazzled and anxious she had become. Her once vibrant, carefree personality had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone jittery and evasive. It wasn't just me who noticed the change. My mother did too. She became more vocal, calling me every other day with her warnings. She told me that marrying Daniel would be a mistake, that I would regret it for the rest of my life if I ignored Lily's claims. She insisted that Lily was telling the truth, and that as hard as it was to believe, I had to protect myself from making the worst decision of my life. The pressure was unbearable. I loved Daniel. I wanted to marry him. But how could I, when my own mother and sister were begging me to walk away? Still, my gut told me that something deeper was at play. There had to be more to this than just a reckless affair. Why now? Why would Lily wait until right before the wedding to tell me all of this? I started paying more attention to the little things I would have otherwise dismissed. Strange texts began showing up on my phone from unknown numbers. They were cryptic messages that sent chills down my spine, warning me to be careful, to stay away from Daniel. At first, I thought it might be Lily trying to reach out indirectly, but she denied it when I asked. Her denials, however, came across as shaky, uncertain, as if she wasn't even sure herself. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Was Daniel lying to me? Was Lily hiding something? Or was this all some kind of twisted game that had spun out of control? I had to dig deeper, so I started investigating Daniel's past. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I had to find something, anything, that could explain the chaos my life had become. I didn't want to believe that Daniel had done what Lily claimed, but I needed to be sure. What I found didn't give me the comfort I was hoping for. It started small, an old relationship from years ago, something Daniel had never really talked much about. I had known he had been engaged before, but he always made it seem like it ended amicably. They were young, grew apart, and moved on. Or at least, that was the story he had told me. But as I started digging, I found rumors that painted a different picture. The breakup had been far messier than Daniel had let on. His ex-fiancée had disappeared from their lives overnight, and some of the things I heard suggested that there had been more to their separation than just a mutual decision. There were whispers about infidelity, betrayal, even an affair with someone close to the ex. Could it have been something similar to what I was experiencing now? I reached out to one of her old friends, someone who still lived in town and who, reluctantly, agreed to meet with me. The story she told was unsettling. According to her, Daniel's ex-fiancée had been devastated by their breakup, and though she never went into details, she had told a few people that she had discovered something that shattered her trust in Daniel completely. She left abruptly and never looked back. I started to wonder if Daniel had a pattern, if maybe this was something he had done before. Had I been too blind, too in love, to see the signs? I couldn't let these doubts fester any longer, But every time I thought about confronting him with what I had learned, the fear of what I might discover paralyzed me. What if Lily was right? What if Daniel was hiding something from me, just as he had with his ex-fiancée? The tension between me and Lily finally exploded one evening when I cornered her at her apartment. I couldn't take the evasiveness anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I pushed her for the truth, demanding to know what really happened between her and Daniel. She broke down, tears streaming down her face as she insisted it had been a mistake, that she never meant for it to happen. But even as she cried, something about her story felt off. She was frantic, her words scattered, and the more I pressed, the more her responses didn't add up. It was as if she was struggling to keep the story straight in her head, and her erratic behavior only fueled my suspicions. Was she lying to me? Had someone put her up to this? The thought crossed my mind more than once. But why? What could anyone possibly gain by tearing my life apart right before my wedding? As the days went by, I found myself standing on the precipice of a decision that would change everything. I was so close to calling off the wedding. My trust in Daniel had been shattered, and yet, without all the pieces of the puzzle, I couldn't walk away. Not yet. The warnings from the unknown numbers continued to plague me, each message more ominous than the last. Someone didn't want me to marry Daniel, that much was clear. But whether it was for my own good or for some darker reason, I couldn't tell. I was caught in the middle of a web of lies and half-truths, unsure of who I could trust anymore. With the wedding only days away, I knew I had to make a choice. But every option seemed like it would lead to ruin, no matter which path I chose. One thing was certain, though. The answers I sought weren't going to come easily. The more I dug into Lily's story, the more tangled it became. What had once been a straightforward accusation began to dissolve into something far murkier, something I hadn't expected. My sister was lying. I was almost certain of it now, but what I couldn't figure out was why. What did she stand to gain by tearing apart my relationship with Daniel? I didn't want to think that Lily was capable of such manipulation, but as the days went by and more secrets came to light, I couldn't ignore the possibility. The first crack appeared when I found out about her recent toxic relationship. It was a connection I had only vaguely been aware of, someone she had dated briefly after college but had never brought around the family. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Lily had always been private about her relationships, more interested in her freedom than in settling down. But now, it seemed like this relationship had left her more damaged than I realized. Whispers began to reach me from people who knew her, friends, old acquaintances, about how badly things had ended between her and this man. There were rumors that Lily had been left heartbroken and humiliated. I couldn't get a clear picture of what had happened, but it was enough to raise red flags. Could this recent heartbreak be fueling her behavior now? Was she projecting her pain onto me and Daniel, using the pregnancy as a weapon? But then came the most startling discovery of all. There was a possibility that the pregnancy didn't even exist. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Could Lily really be lying about something so serious? My mind raced back to the conversation with her and our mother, the looks exchanged between them, the anxiety in their voices. The more I thought about it, the more pieces began to fall into place. The panic, the urgency in their demand that I cancel the wedding. It all felt off, as if there was some larger agenda at play. I couldn't shake the feeling that my family was hiding something from me, and I needed answers. But before I could fully process these revelations, Daniel found out about the accusations. It happened one night when I came home late after trying to get more information from an old friend of Lily's. As soon as I walked through the door, I could tell something was wrong. Daniel was sitting on the couch, his posture rigid, his face twisted in an expression I hadn't seen before. The moment our eyes met, I knew. He knew. "Emily," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." The conversation that followed was brutal. Daniel was furious, and rightfully so. He demanded to know why I hadn't told him sooner, why I had been keeping these accusations from him while letting him believe everything was fine. He asked me how I could even entertain the idea that he would betray me like that. His anger was palpable, but beneath it, I could see the hurt, the deep, raw pain that came from knowing someone he loved could think so little of him. I tried to explain. I told him about Lily, about the strange texts, the warnings, my own confusion and doubt. But none of it seemed to matter. He was beyond angry. He was devastated. Emily, do you seriously believe I would ever do something like this? His voice cracked, his frustration spilling out. Lily? Your sister? How could you even let that thought cross your mind? I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I hadn't been sure of anything for days. My world had been turned upside down, and I was trying to navigate through the mess of it all. But I couldn't tell him that. I couldn't admit that I had doubted him, even for a moment. When I tried to calm him down, to explain that I wasn't sure what to believe anymore, Daniel snapped. If you can't trust me, then why are we even getting married? Maybe this whole thing is a mistake. The words hung in the air like a lead weight. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't expected him to say that. The thought of calling off the wedding had crossed my mind more than once, but hearing it from Daniel, seeing the pain in his eyes, made it feel real. Too real. Is that what you want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. To call it off? Daniel shook his head, running a hand through his hair, clearly torn. No, Emily, that's not what I want. But I can't marry someone who doesn't trust me. I can't do this if you're always going to be wondering if I'm lying to you. His vulnerability struck me. I had never seen him like this, so open, so raw. The Daniel I knew was always strong, always composed. But now, he looked like a man on the verge of breaking. And for the first time in days, I felt the full weight of what my doubt had done to him. I wanted to tell him that I trusted him, that I believed him, but the words stuck in my throat. The truth was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. My family was telling me one thing. My heart was telling me another, and the two were completely at odds. I was caught between the two people I loved most, and the pressure was tearing me apart. The conversation ended with no resolution. Daniel stormed out of the house, saying he needed space to think. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. I needed space too. Space to figure out what the hell was happening to my life. After he left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind spinning. I needed help. I couldn't do this alone anymore. That night, I called Sophie, my best friend since childhood. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was her. We met the next morning at a coffee shop, and as soon as I saw her, I felt the tears well up in my eyes. Sophie didn't say anything. She just pulled me into a hug, letting me cry until the flood of emotions had passed. When I finally managed to pull myself together, I told her everything: Lily's accusations, the strange texts, Daniel's reaction, and my suspicions about the pregnancy. Sophie listened quietly, her expression serious, nodding every now and then as I poured my heart out. Emily, she said gently, once I'd finished, I think you need to stop listening to everyone else for a minute. What does your gut tell you? I sat there in silence for a moment, trying to think. What did my gut tell me? I had spent so much time listening to my family, to the rumors, to the doubts swirling in my mind, that I hadn't stopped to really listen to myself. I don't know, I admitted finally. I love Daniel. I want to trust him. But my family. Sophie reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. Families can be complicated, Emily, but you have to figure out what's best for you. Not for Lily, not for your mom, for you. Her words sank in, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. She was right. I had been letting my family's voices drown out my own. I had been so focused on trying to figure out if Daniel was lying that I hadn't stopped to consider if my family was the one deceiving me. The conversation with Sophie stayed with me long after we parted ways. I started thinking back to the things I had overheard, the strange looks between Lily and my mother, the way they had both been so insistent that I call off the wedding. There was something they weren't telling me, something more than just the affair. And then it happened, the moment that changed everything. I was at my mother's house, trying to get some answers from her about Lily's recent behavior, when I overheard a conversation I was never supposed to hear. My mother was talking to Lily in the next room, and the door was slightly ajar. I couldn't see them, but I could hear every word. She's getting too close, my mother whispered, her voice filled with anxiety. You have to stick to the story, Lily. If Emily finds out what really happened, it's all over. Lily's voice was shaky, panicked. I know, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. She's starting to suspect. My blood ran cold. What were they talking about? What were they hiding from me? I stayed frozen in place, listening as they continued to talk, my heart pounding in my chest. The more they spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about the wedding. There was something much deeper going on, something I hadn't even considered. Jealousy, manipulation, lies. It all started to make sense. By the time I left my mother's house that day, I knew one thing for sure. My family wasn't protecting me. They were controlling me. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into an abyss, knowing that whatever decision I made next would change everything. The web of lies and deceit that had been spun around me by the people I trusted the most was unraveling before my eyes, and I was barely holding it together. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and betrayal. How could this have happened? How could my own family, the people I had always relied on, have manipulated me so deeply? The weight of everything was crushing. I couldn't keep pretending like things were normal, couldn't keep walking on eggshells around the truth. I needed answers. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And I knew that the first step was confronting Lily. I called her, my voice calm and steady, but inside I was trembling. I need to see you. Now. Lily didn't argue. Maybe she knew it was coming. Maybe she had felt the walls closing in, just like I had. We met at her apartment, and from the moment she opened the door, I could tell something had shifted in her. The usual defensiveness, the jittery avoidance, it was gone. She looked exhausted, defeated, as if she had been carrying a burden that was too heavy for her. We sat down, and for a moment, there was only silence. I wasn't sure how to begin. I had so many questions, so many things I wanted to say, but the words stuck in my throat. Finally, it was Lily who broke the silence. "Emily," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Those words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had imagined this confrontation going differently. I had pictured anger, accusations, maybe even denial. But instead, here was my little sister, looking like she was about to break apart, apologizing before I even asked her anything. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you really pregnant?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head slowly. "No, I'm not." The relief that washed over me was immediate, but it was quickly followed by a surge of anger. "Then why?" I demanded, my voice rising with each word. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you say Daniel was the father? Why would you do that?" Lily crumpled under the weight of my words, sobbing openly now. She tried to speak, but her words were a tangled mess of apologies and guilt. It took a while, but eventually, she managed to choke out the truth, the real truth. "It wasn't me," she cried. "It was Mom. She made me do it." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "Mom?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "What do you mean? What does she have to do with this?" Lily buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She was scared, Emily. She thought Daniel was going to take you away from us. From her. She couldn't handle the idea of losing you. So, she came up with this plan. She told me to say I was pregnant, to say that Daniel was the father. I didn't want to do it, but she wouldn't stop. She kept pushing and pushing. I didn't know what else to do. The room spun around me as I tried to process what Lily was saying. My mother, my own mother, had orchestrated this entire nightmare. She had used Lily, manipulated her, just to keep me from marrying the man I loved. The sheer audacity of it, the cruelty, left me speechless. Lily reached for me, her voice desperate. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought you'd find out, or that Daniel would. I don't know. I thought it would end before it got this bad, but I was too scared to stop it. I'm so sorry." I stared at her, my heart breaking for the both of us. How had it come to this? How had we allowed our mother to poison our lives like this? Lily had been trapped, just like me, but that didn't erase the damage. The lies, the betrayal, they had cut deep, and I wasn't sure if they could ever fully heal. I didn't know what to say, so I stood up. "I need to talk to Mom." Lily didn't try to stop me. She knew, just as I did, that this confrontation was inevitable. When I arrived at my mother's house, I was still shaking with anger. The woman who had raised me, who had always been the one I turned to for comfort and support, had become a stranger to me in the blink of an eye. Everything felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her tea like it was just another ordinary day. She looked up when I walked in, and her face softened with that familiar, maternal concern. "Emily, sweetie, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I didn't waste any time. I know what you did," I said, my voice hard and cold. Lily told me everything. The mask of concern on her face faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Emily, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me," I snapped, slamming my hands down on the table. "I know everything. I know you made Lily lie to me about being pregnant. I know you've been manipulating us both to stop me from marrying Daniel." "Why, Mom? Why would you do that?" For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and something darker, something possessive. "I was protecting you," she said finally, her voice calm, almost too calm. "I was doing what needed to be done to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Protecting me? By lying to me? By tearing apart my relationship? How is that protecting me? She shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand, Emily. Daniel, he's not the man you think he is. He's going to take you away from us. From me. I've seen it happen before. Men like him, they isolate you, make you choose between them and your family. I couldn't let that happen to you." I stood there, stunned by her words. The depth of her manipulation, the way she had twisted everything to justify her actions. It was horrifying. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about control. She couldn't stand the idea of me having a life outside of her influence. "And Lily?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You used her. You made her lie to me. How could you do that to your own daughter?" My mother's expression hardened. "Lily is weak. She does what she's told. She knew what was best for you, for all of us. We're a family, Emily. We stick together." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "This isn't family, Mom. This is control. You don't care about my happiness. You just don't want to lose me." Her face twisted into something ugly, something unrecognizable. "You're mine," she hissed. "You don't get to just walk away from this family. Not for some man." I felt a surge of clarity in that moment, a sharp, painful realization that my mother wasn't someone I could trust anymore. She wasn't someone I could lean on or confide in. The woman who had raised me, who had been my rock for so long, had become a stranger. And the worst part? She had done it all in the name of love, in the name of protecting me, when in reality, all she had done was destroy everything. "I'm not yours," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm my own person, and I'm done letting you control me." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother didn't respond, but the look in her eyes said everything. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I left her house that day knowing that things would never be the same again. The bond between us had been severed, and there was no way to repair it. The lies, the manipulation, it had all gone too far. In the days that followed, I had to make the hardest decision of my life. The wedding was only days away, but everything had changed. I no longer saw the world through the same lens. My family had betrayed me in ways I never thought possible, and yet, standing at the edge of that decision, I knew I had to choose for myself. I met with Daniel, and for the first time in weeks, we spoke openly and honestly. I told him everything: Lily's confession, my mother's manipulation, the doubts I had carried. He listened, his face etched with pain, but he didn't interrupt. When I was finished, he took my hands in his and said something I hadn't expected. "I love you, Emily, and I'll marry you whenever you're ready. But if you need time, if you need to figure this out on your own, I'll wait. I'm not going anywhere." His words broke through the last of the doubt that had clouded my mind. This was the man I loved, not the lies my family had spun, not the fears my mother had planted in me. Daniel was the person who had stood by me through everything, and now he was giving me the freedom to choose. In the end, the choice was simple. I chose me. And as I walked down the aisle on my wedding day, I wasn't just walking toward Daniel. I was walking toward my future, toward a life that I had chosen, independent of the forces that had tried to control me. If you like the story, don't hesitate to subscribe and listen to new stories every day. Write in the comments what you like the most.